This stool, is one of those things that has come about almost by chance. My friend David Smith was here last week, and after the service was over, he said, sitting on that stool is a great idea. I don't know when it started.
It was started with Jim.
Was it with Jim?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It makes a difference to be sitting on a stool and not standing up in some kind of a pulpit preaching down at people. Anyway, the closing words of the psalm. May the words of my mouth, the meditation of my heart, be acceptable to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. I should tell you something just about this psalm, because when I was a kid, the age of those kids back at the table there, I occasionally said to my parents, I don't want to go to church. Church is boring. And they, being wise parents, said, all right, we'll give you a choice. You can go to church, or you can memorize a psalm. So I memorized, probably about a dozen of those psalms over the years, and Psalm 19 was one of them. And perhaps because I memorized it, it has stuck with me. And as the years have passed, I've come to recognize more the wisdom that was contained in these words that I memorized. I'm sure you have read about the kind of controversies that they have down in the United States with people who insist that you cannot teach evolution in the schools. You remember the Scopes monkey trial? That was back about almost a century ago now. And yet it's still going on, and they're still saying you can't teach evolution in the schools. It's only a theory, and besides, it doesn't agree with the Bible. And if it doesn't agree with the Bible, it can't be right. My reaction to that is that those people don't know their Bibles very well. They're being very selective in what they choose to say the Bible is about. They will tell you, for example, the story of Adam and Eve word for word, and make sure you understand every word in it. But I don't think that they have read Psalm 19. I don't think they are willing to admit that the Bible has two versions of creation. And if you haven't looked them up, it's worth looking them up. Chapter 1 in Genesis says, in the beginning, and then it goes on in a sequence that actually dovetails quite well with what we know through science. That in the beginning, there was chaos. There was nothing. There was just massive disorder. And out of it came order. And out of it came land and water. And out of land and water came life. And the life was first the plants. How did people 3,000 years ago know that the first life was plants, not animals? Somehow they did. And then out of the animals, we have the fish of the seas, the birds of the air, and finally, and chapter 1 is very clear, the very last thing that God made was humans. And then God rested. And I think that was because he was expecting humans to carry on. Now the second chapter is a direct contradiction. It says that the very first thing God made was a man.
Oh dear.
And it was a mistake, John? It goes on to say that after God made a man, God made all the plants and the animals and invited the man to name them. And then after all that had been done, God finally created a woman. so that the man would have some company. Now, oh yes, and a woman who could then be blamed for everything that went wrong from that time afterwards. One of the stories comes pretty close to what we know from science. And the other story, it seems to me, was probably created partly out of the myths of other people who were around, the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians, but also partly because men wanted an authoritative thing to say that they were in charge. Because it's all set up with that idea. Modern science tells us that the second... Joan, are you having fun with this? Is Ken going to hear about this when he gets home?
Not saying a word.
Yeah, modern science says that the second story is nonsense. When our son was coming up for confirmation, which was, I don't think we've had a confirmation class here in years, but confirmation was the way in which people were made full members of the United Church. And he'd been taking classes with his minister for several weeks, and he finally came to us and said, "I can't go through with this." So we wondered why. And he explained that, I think the words he said was, "I'm supposed to confirm that I believe God made the world in 6 days. And everything I learn in school and through reading says that it took millions of years. I'm not willing to lie about what I know." So we did a bit of reasoning, and he decided to go through with it after all. I think mostly to please us, not to satisfy himself. He told me later that he answered all the questions the way he was supposed to, and he kept his fingers crossed the whole time. If you actually read the Bible, and try to read the Bible, not just look for things that support your own convictions, you'll find a few surprising things. One is that there's nothing in the Bible that says that it is always right. It admits that there were times when God changed, I'm going to use His because I can't think of anything else at the moment, when God changed His mind and decided to do things differently. There are times when it looks back and says, what God instructed us to do was wrong, or we misunderstood God. The Bible never says it is absolutely right, and there is nothing in the Bible that denies other forms of knowledge, that says you cannot trust science. If you look at the Bible, there, for example, there is not a word in there about mathematics. And I wonder what you would do each day if you didn't trust mathematics. There is not a word in there about chemistry. And you're using chemistry every single day. There is almost nothing about astronomy. Can't remember the kid's name, but he was talking about looking up at the skies last night. The only thing it says about astronomy is the assumption that the earth is flat and that the sun and the moon go over the top and go down on the other side. I wonder how people who believe that the Bible is the only answer, the all-time answer, deal with a round earth orbiting the sun. You see, if those sciences aren't trustworthy, we wouldn't be here. The writer of Psalm 19, and one of the reasons that I like this is that the writer of Psalm 19 recognizes that scientific knowledge is necessary. The opening words were, "The heavens declare the glory of God." The stars, the galaxies, tell us about God. The firmament displays God's handiwork. This planet, the firmament, reveals how God works. Day unto day pours forth speech. Well, not words, but that the world we live in is trying to tell us something. Every time we look at a flower coming up, every time John takes us out to look at a rock out there, it tells us something. Night unto night declares knowledge, which is that when we settle down and start thinking about these things, we're able to put stuff into order and make sense out of it. That's the psalmist speaking years and years ago. And then he goes on to say something more. He says, "The law of the Lord is perfect." And most people, when they hear that, will say, that's the Ten Commandments, right? If the Ten Commandments are perfect, how come they get broken constantly? If they're perfect, how can they be broken? Now, the unbroken laws, the laws that you cannot break, are things like the law of gravity. Doesn't matter where you live, it doesn't matter who you are. If you walk off a cliff, you're going to fall. There are no exceptions. In mathematics, every race, every religion, every country, 2 and 2 equals what?
22.
Have you talked to your accountant recently? 2 and 2 are 4. 3 times 3 is 9. If 2 and 2 could equal 5 or 17, the entire structure of the universe would collapse. Because it can't happen. These are some of the chemistry. The simplest experiment, the one that they do at the very beginning, you take some hydrochloric acid and you take some lye and you mix them together and it foams away and you get ordinary table salt and water. It doesn't matter how many times you do that experiment, it is always going to come up with table salt and water. It will never produce broccoli. These laws cannot be broken. That's what makes them perfect. The 92 elements that we have are completely predictable when they react with other elements. If they weren't, we wouldn't have clothes, for example. Some of you, I'm sure, are wearing things that are made out of polypropylene or nylon or something. Those are chemical reactions that create those things. And we know how to use them, and we know that they are dependable. Now, this is where it gets difficult, because I'm going to ask you to take a mental leap. You're probably sitting here thinking, what he's going to tell us is that God set up these rules so that they would be there forever. I want you to try thinking slightly differently. Not that God out there set up the rules. Think of God as the rules. God is the relationships of the chemicals, of the mathematical symbols, of the physics stuff. They are all relationships and they work together, and God is the working together. In that sense, you see, God is not separate from the natural world. God is integrated right into the natural world, the real world that we live in. And when we explore quantum physics with these infinitely tiny particles that they can't even identify, God is there. And when we create poetry and song, we're finding ways of exposing God within us, among us. When Bev and Don explore how the human brain works, they're looking for God. Because God is in that. God is part of that. Canada's Aboriginal peoples have that saying, all my relations. And they're talking about their relations with the natural world, but they grasp something in that phrase, that everything is in relationship with everything else. And so God is not a caribou, and God is not a mountain, and God is not a waterfall, but God is the relationship of that waterfall with the soil around it. God is the relationship of the people with the caribou. God is in, as I said to the kids, you have to look between the lines, between the people, to find God in there. The reason that book title works, Nothing Looks Like God, is because we keep on thinking about things. And it's really saying no thing looks like God. I wish it had said everything looks like God. God is here. God is out there. God is in every way that we relate to the world around us. And the writer of Psalm 19 tells us that the whole earth, the whole universe, is what somebody called God's science text, as opposed to God's literary text. You have to read it to find out. So I am going to use those slides, Margaret.
Good.
I'm going to go back to the psalm that Fran read for us. Where are you, Fran? There you are, back there. I'll do your lines. And you people, I want you to respond with, given what I've been talking about, what might be your response to the psalmist. So can we have the first one? The heavens declare the glory of God.
The whole universe is God's textbook.
And the firmament proclaims God's handiwork.
Galaxies glow at infinite distances, while the earth blossoms with abundant light.
Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge.
Our days come alive with learning, and our nights with understanding.
There is no speech, there is no words, their voice is not heard.
Rocks do not need words, nor do cells need syllables, for their message can be read everywhere.
Yet their voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world.
Curiosity and exploration are not limited to any language or nation.
The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul.
We find God in the independent web of life.
The decrees of the Lord are sure, making wise the simple.
Predictable patterns become evident as we study them.
The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart.
The law of the universe unfolds like a flower before inquiring minds.
The commandment of the Lord is clear, enlightening the eyes.
We give up old assumptions. We begin to see things differently.
The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever.
In awe and humility, we explore the intricate mesh of a planet pulsing with life.
The ordinances of the Lord are true and righteous altogether.
We discover the underlying order of the universe. It is so true, so right, that we can only stand in awe.
More to be desired are they than gold, sweeter even than honey and the drippings of the honeycomb.
What we learn is worth more than wealth or popularity, more than traditional maxims or carefully crafted phrases.
By them is your servant warned, yet in keeping them there is great reward.
For by them we come to understand where we fit into the network that is God. Within this amazing framework, we can take our proper place in the universe.
I hope you meant it.